Hello and welcome to another Louisburgh Community TV video. This is week 9 and welcome to Tertulia.
A bookshop like no other.
And we're coming to you from our schoolhouse once again, but we are opening on 8th of June, so I think next week we'll probably be in the shop, filming in the shop.
Yeah, we hope so.
And this week we have been busy ordering books for when we do open, and we've been getting lots of email and phone orders too, so it's been keeping us busy. And this week on Tertulia TV we have Helen Cullen, who is the author of Lost Letters of William Woolf. She's going to be talking to me. Well, I interview Helen about her new book. Also, we have Eleanor Fitzsimons, who is author of Wild Women. She's going to be talking about her latest book too. So this week, what have you been reading, Neil?
Right, well, I finished off Sebastian Barry's book, 1,000 Moons, which thoroughly enjoyed. Really a brilliant book. Kind of like a follow-on from Days Without End, but I thought it was actually better than the first book. So fascinating. We obviously have this in the bookshop, so I recommend that 100%. I'm going to start this fairly soon, probably tonight actually.
That's Elif Shafak. He's Turkish.
Turkish, and she writes in Turkish and in English, obviously.
And she was nominated for the Booker Prize in 2019. Well, shortlisted. She was one of the 6 shortlisted.
Yes.
We listened to her this week on the Hay Festival, which is going on online at the moment from the 18th to the 30th of May. So we've been listening to some fantastic interviews. Today we had Hamnet, which we also have in the shop, and we listened to Elif Shafak. Now, she wasn't talking about her book, although it did get mentioned, but she was talking about humanity, and fascinating to listen to her. Her big message was that, you know, in these COVID times, not to take democracy for granted, and that really we need to think about the kind of world that we want to create after this, and do we really want to go back to the world as it was? So she's not just an author, she's an humanitarian and does a lot of work in this field.
I'm also reading Paul Preston's new book, People Betrayed. It's about the way the Spanish political system 100 years ago was basically very corrupt, and if you think things are bad now, this will make you feel better. It's a brilliant book.
Yeah, it'll really cheer you up.
It's I'm getting through it slowly. It's one of those books that you just pick up now and then, and it's thoroughly enjoyable. And we have that in the bookshop as well.
And me, I'm still ploughing on. Well, I shouldn't say ploughing. That makes it sound awful. A Theatre for Dreamers. I'm halfway through, and I am still loving it. We did talk about that last week, and we've sold quite a few this week actually. People have asked us for them because it's a lovely summer read. And this is my sort of more hardcore book. It's David Christian it's called A History of Everything, a big history of everything, and it is fascinating. It's like Sapiens, if any of you have read that, but he talks more about the stars and how we were formed and the Big Bang, all those questions that you have, and he explains them so wonderfully. So that's my pickup book when I want to read something a bit more deep and meaningful. So what have we got up next?
Now we're going to have go over to Eleanor Fitzsimons.
Okay.
Of the Fabian Society, very much there at the beginning of the socialist movement in England at a very exciting time, and she had an enormous belief in social justice and in fairness, and in fact she did a huge amount of charity work for the impoverished children of Deptford, where she lived for a time. She always lived in and around Kent and in and around Greater London. Very much an English author, had a great love of the English countryside, and wrote beautifully, in fact, about boating holidays that she took along the Medway River. So her nature writing is also well worthwhile and very beautiful, and in fact finds its way into a lot of her books for adults. She had a very idyllic childhood until she was about 4 years old. She grew up in an agricultural college, really in the heart of London, around by Vauxhall, around by the Oval Cricket Ground, if people know that part of London. And the house where she grew up, it was one of 2 houses actually attached together. The boarders in the college, the agricultural college that her father ran, lived in one, and Edith and her family grew up in the other. She was the youngest of 5 children. She had 2 older brothers and 2 older sisters, and she had a lot of freedom running around London, running around the grounds of the college, and also further afield. She was a huge fan of the Crystal Palace, and she visited the stone dinosaurs on Penge Common, and had a wonderful childhood that in fact finds its way into a lot of her literature for children. When she was 4 years old, tragedy hit the family. Her father died of tuberculosis after a prolonged illness, and her mother tried to run the college for a time but didn't succeed, but took the family travelling because unfortunately Mary, Edith's older sister, had by then also contracted tuberculosis and her health was very poor. So she again had quite a difficult time of it from the age of about 7 until she was in her early teens, and her sister Mary unfortunately died. She spent much of her time travelling around France, seeking a climate that would suit her sister and help her with her illness, but unfortunately to no avail. So the family returned to England, and in time Edith and her mother, left alone in the house, lived for a time again in central London, and Edith met and married a man called Hubert Bland, a very charismatic, very charming man by all accounts, but very difficult to live with, and unfortunately dreadfully unfaithful to her. She was 7 months pregnant when they married, and she was just 21 years of age. And actually it's quite interesting that at that time there was an outbreak of a smallpox epidemic in London. And so for a time the family were split apart. Hubert had to go and live with his mother in quarantine, while Edith lived at home with their newborn son. And it was then really that she started to write to earn money for the family, and she wrote verse for cards, for Christmas cards and birthday cards, and small books of verse, beautifully illustrated, often by herself because she was an accomplished artist. And that was the beginning really of her writing career. She turned to poetry in as much as she could, but the money wasn't there really, the money she needed. So she began to write serialised children's books for particularly the Strand magazine, but other magazines also. And as a result, she became hugely successful and she earned a good deal of money. So for a time, the family, who by then were a family of 7, 8 if you include Hubert's longtime lover and Edith's friend Alice, who was mother of 2 children and then 3 children born to Edith herself. So there were 5 children and 3 adults in the household. They lived in a fantastic, fabulous, rambling old house called Well Hall House in Eltham, in Greater London. The house no longer stands, but the grounds are there and they're very beautiful. And while they were there, they were wealthy, they were successful, the gregarious couple, and they entertained some of the absolute political and literary luminaries of the day. They would have invited George Bernard Shaw to come and stay, and in fact Shaw and Edith had an unconsummated, largely, love affair for a time themselves. H.G. Wells learned to play badminton there, Edith taught him, and just about anybody you can think of in literary London came down to Well Hall to the wonderful parties that Edith held there. Beautiful grounds and fabulous flowers. And the whole place decorated with lights, and everybody just having the most extraordinary conversations, I'm sure. A wonderful time in her life, but also a difficult time, because during this time she lost her beloved son Fabian, who died very tragically after what should have been a very routine operation carried out at home, and unfortunately he never came around from the anaesthetic. And so at that time, which would have been the turn of the century, 1900, she threw herself into her writing, and she wrote many of the books that she's most famous for. Her marriage was always quite difficult, but she stuck with Hubert to the end. And in fact, after he died, she had a second marriage to a man who absolutely adored her and looked after her very well in her old age. So she fell on hard times really around the time of her first husband's death. Her writing was less popular than it had been previously, and for a time, in fact, she sold vegetables and flowers out of her own garden, and she kept chickens and sold eggs to the local women, and really was very enterprising. She continued to write, but just not with the degree of success that she had enjoyed, but she also developed an absolute passion for Shakespeare and for the various conspiracy theories concerning the authorship of his plays, and she devoted much wasted time and energy to that pursuit. She had the most fascinating life, and she knew the most amazing people, and she seems to have been the most incredible, entertaining, fascinating, exasperating at times woman. So it was an absolute joy to spend time with her and to write about her life. And I hope that if you decide to take the book out of your local library or purchase it in a good bookshop like Tertulia Books, that you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed writing it. And thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
So thanks, Eleanor, for that lovely interview, and we hope to meet you sometime in the shop soon. And we have had your books, and we will be ordering that latest book now that we can actually order more books. And what else this week? So I listened to an interview with Mary Robinson. It was actually last Sunday, and I just thought it was worth mentioning. She was asked by Miriam O'Callaghan 3 things that she would take away in this time, and these were her 3 things. That human behaviour matters, which is a huge thing, because we now know that our actions, albeit small and individual, actually do make a difference. So she's asking us really to take that away. That science matters. We often don't listen to signs, our politicians don't listen to signs, and that actually in this case we've been living with signs and we need to pay more attention to it, particularly in relation to the climate. And that government matters, that what our government does really makes a difference. And as we've seen, the actions that they take really affects the collective. So I just thought they were 3 really interesting, succinct things to think about in this time.
Yeah, that's one. And now I think we're going to go over to, Bree's going to talk to Helen.
Yeah, over to me and Helen.
Hi Helen, welcome to our show today. Helen, this is Helen Cullen, an author from Portlaoise, isn't it, originally?
That's
and
right,
then
yeah.
Yeah, then you saw the bright lights of London, and now you were in London, in Clapham, I believe, which I do know well, and then you went out to live in Buckinghamshire, was it? That's where you are now? Okay, so Helen's first book, The Lost Letters of William Woolf, we have had many copies of the gorgeous book in our shop, and now you have a new book coming out. So first of all, I'll just ask you to say a little bit about yourself and your inspiration. I know I've read that you loved books from a child and wanted to write as a child, so maybe just tell us a bit about yourself.
Oh, thank you so much, Bree. It's so lovely to get to speak to you today from Buckinghamshire all the way to Westport. I'd rather be in Westport.
I know,
But thanks so much for having me and for being so supportive with the books. I mean, what would we do without our indie bookshops? So it's amazing that you're finding all these new and exciting, innovative ways to talk to your readers during this time.
So thank you.
You're welcome. I'm delighted to be here. So I guess you're absolutely right. I did always want to write when I was little. I think where, some of my friends in primary school were mad about their dolls and, dolls' houses and games. I always had my nose in a book. It was my favourite thing to do the whole way when I was growing up. And I suppose when I was a little girl, if you'd asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up, I would have thought I wanted to be an author. But it took me an awful long time as an adult to sort of begin to take that seriously. I think I had this idea that real writers were born and not made, and that if I was meant to be writing books, that it would have just sort of happened automatically, that I wouldn't have been able to resist it, and that I would have been compelled to write, and nothing would have gotten in my way, whereas everything got in my way because I was so scared of it. So it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I really took the plunge and decided to give myself a chance to see if there was something in this instinct that I had, that I wanted to try and write a book myself. So the book that you mentioned, The Lost Letters of William Woolf, the first thing I ever wrote was the first chapter of that book. And that sort of set me on my way. And now, a few years on, I've had the second one coming out and trying to write the third one at home. So it was like once I sort of let myself go into it, I just kind of never stopped then, just kept going. It just took a while to take.
Because what I was intrigued by when I was reading about you was that you said that, or it said in Gloss magazine, that you did a 6-month course on how to write a novel, was it? And that was then the first chapter of The Lost Letters. But that is really inspiring, because like I myself have been writing for, donkey's years, and like you too, I loved books as a kid, and there are loads of us, I might say, like that. So I just think maybe to explain or to say a little bit about that, because what inspired me after listening to you was, oh my God, maybe we need to run 6-month courses as part of Tertulia to get all those writers out there to actually, start their writing like yourself. So how did it kind of work for you?
Well, I mean, gosh, I actually think in some ways, sometimes I get a bit frightened to think about how easily I might never have written a book.
Yeah.
Because I could have gone on forever. I went to see, writers at literary festivals or in bookshops, and they would always say things like, oh, before I published this book, I had 4 other books in my drawer, or, I was writing stories from when I was a child and I never stopped. And I always found that really intimidating, because it almost felt like it was too late for me before I'd even started. And I actually, my writing mentor, who's an amazing novelist called Michelle Roberts, who ran that course, said, if you're not dead, it's not too late.
Oh, well, yeah, that's good and bad, but yeah, good.
I often think of her saying that, you know, that we convince ourselves that the moment is past, but the moment's never passed, really, you know. And I think that doing the writing course for me, I knew that I had managed to avoid writing my whole life just because I was so scared of it, and that for me it would really have to have some kind of infrastructure or accountability where there would be someone expecting me to produce work, and I would have a kind of a group of writers who were all engaged with each other's work, and that it might give me sort of the motivation to keep trying. And I remember you know, we had to produce, you know, 5,000 words every 2 weeks, and I would spend 13 days panicking, thinking, oh God, like there's no way I'm going to be able to do this. I haven't even like 13 words, never mind 5,000. And then on the Sunday afternoon, when I'd really be feeling the pressure of, oh, tomorrow I'm going to go in and supposedly hand in my work, and Michelle's going to say to me, you know, where's your piece this week, Helen? And the idea of saying to her, oh God, you know, I couldn't do it, just felt awful. So I would sit down on the Sunday afternoon, and then I would just go. And I think one of the reasons why it worked so well was that she really encouraged us not to feel too precious about those early drafts. You know, that this was just a way of working out for ourselves what the story might be. And that if you're constantly comparing your first draft to the books that you read that are published, that have gone through maybe 25 drafts, then you're always going to feel like, oh, I can't do this and my work doesn't measure up. But, you know, understanding that this is just the beginning, you'll come back and edit this later, you can perfect anything in your edit, you can think about your design of what the whole novel will be later, but the important thing is just to get the story down so that you understand what it is. And I think that felt really liberating, because you kind of come in every week with no what you've done to be absolutely brilliant or to be polished or perfect, but it was more exploring and experimenting with, oh, is this what my book could be? And sometimes you would try out things like that and go, I was thinking about introducing this other voice, so I've written a chapter, what do you think? And then people would give you feedback on it. And it just was a way of sort of, you know, kind of getting through that first draft with the support of a group of people who were invested in you getting it over the line. And I think that really helped me, and it just took the heat out of it, you know, that it didn't matter if it wasn't working or it wasn't making this, you know, or if it felt
well, it worked, because you had the Lost Letters of William Woolf, and it's brilliant. So now, but you've got your second book, which also looks brilliant. So maybe tell us a bit about that. I love the title, The Truth Must Dazzle, isn't
gradually.
it? Dazzle, yes, gradually, yes. It's gorgeous, yeah.
Yes, my second novel is called The Truth Must Dazzle Gradually. That's the artwork if you'd like to have a little look at it. And it tells the story of the Moon family, who live on a little island off the west coast of Ireland called Inishogue. And when the novel opens, it's Christmas Eve in 2005, and a terrible tragedy befalls the family. And then we go back in time and we meet Murtagh and Maeve, who are the mum and dad of the Moons. And it's the 70s, and it's an exciting time to be living in Dublin, and it's colourful and vivid, and their whole lives are ahead of them. And so we see them in a totally different stage in their life. And from there we travel forward with them until that fateful evening on Christmas Eve, when hopefully by the time you reach there, about halfway through the book, you begin to understand why what happened. And afterwards we travel forward with the Moon family to pretty much present day up to 2015. And we understand the impact that the tragedy had on them as a family, and we also see them growing up and how their lives continued on from that date forwards. And I think originally it was inspired by this idea I'd heard about called kintsugi, which is a Japanese art form with ceramics where they repair broken vases or pots by repairing the cracks that are in the ceramics with gold or silver filament, so that the objects become more beautiful because of their history and because of their scars than ever before. And I was really interested in this idea about how, you know, afterwards, after something terrible might have befallen us, how actually our lives can be even more beautiful somehow by having come through those difficult times. And so at the beginning of the novel, that's what I was thinking about when I was putting this together. And then by the end of it, I had realised that the big theme of the book really was about personal truth, and how sometimes our personal truths don't necessarily align with what are considered to be universally accepted truths. And by understanding that, even if the truth dawns on us gradually, we can be dazzled by the beauty of it and find peace within it. So it's really interesting how you can start off in the writing process thinking that your book is about one thing, and then by the time you reach the end realizing that it's telling a whole different story.
Oh, well, look, we look forward to seeing you sometime in the shop or speaking to you again in some way or other. And you've definitely inspired us to get writing somehow again. And
Maybe I can workshop for you one day in the shop. That would be
oh, I'd
amazing.
love to do that. Definitely. We are planning events and things whenever we can get back together. So we'd love that, Helen. Okay, take care. Thank you for coming. Okay, bye.
Thanks, Brie. That was insightful, and thanks to Helen.
Yeah, it was a lovely interview, and I'm really looking forward to again meeting Helen. She's definitely going to come to Westport when the travel restrictions are lifted. And yeah, I think that's kind of it for this week.
Yeah, that's
for
it
us.
for now. But like I say, stay tuned. We're going to be open fairly soon, and we're very excited by that.
Okay, thank you to Helen, to Eleanor, and to us, and to you for listening. Bye bye.
Bye bye.